Welcome back. My name is Carl Magnussen. I work as Chief of Staff, World Culture Museums. I've had a long history in this organization, both with international relations and as a director of this museum for 4 years. So I'm so happy that we can host it here, this conference. I hope you enjoy lunch and also the visit to our exhibition, Human Nature, of which we are very proud, of course, as you understand. Now we turn into 1 hour of panel discussion, sharing of ideas, perspectives on the topic of the day. Before I ask the members of the panel to introduce themselves, although we all of us now quite know Bridget quite well now, since before lunch, so I will pass on the word to the other participants. We will structure this discussion, this conversation on 2 main themes, and I think that we first will discuss a little bit on the collections as a climate archive, and then we turn to a broader theme on the role of museums in this time with these challenges and what can we do. And I suggest that we start with the first theme. The participants can give their perspectives, and then we open up the floor for discussion or questions on that theme, and then we turn to the second. So that's how I want to structure this. So, again, 1 hour, and then we turn into group sessions, and that will be introduced by my colleague, Johanna. So, since I leave Bridget, our international guest, out, I turn to Marie. So please, a brief presentation of yourself.
Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. So my name is Marie Kvarnström, and I work as a researcher and officer at the Swedish Biodiversity Center at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. I work a lot with dialogue with local communities with a focus on local knowledge and traditional knowledge. And that, of course, has linkages to museum work and linkages to collections from the past way of doing things, links to how do we do things today and how should we do things in the future in a sustainable way. So I'm really happy to be here and look forward to talking to you.
Yeah. Well, okay. Feras? I think it's on. Yep.
Yeah.
It's
okay.
On.
Can you hear me now? All right. So my name is Feras Hammami, and I'm a researcher and teacher at the Department of Conservation, University of Gothenburg. I have a research in the field of politicization of cultural heritage and the implication of that to city development, and partially or specifically look at questions of displacement, destruction of social commons, and resistance. So I look, for example, the ways in which the past is considered in the way cities change, and what implications does that have for future policies. I worked in contexts like Palestine, where I originally come from, Botswana, Turkey, Sweden. That's in general.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and then Martin.
Okay, this works, okay. My name is Martin Schulz. I started to work here for the National Museums of World Culture only a bit less than 2 years ago. And I'm the proud curator of the 2nd largest collection from North America here in Europe. My focus is on material culture, especially material culture pre-1850 from North and Central America. And one of the focus that I have here is on the Arctic collections, especially important now with the topic we are talking about here today.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. And I know that you are representing a lot of different kinds of institutions here. We have natural history museums, we have history museum, we have art museums, and being custodians of the cultural heritage for present and future generations, I would like to start off the question. I will ask Martin first, although you are our colleague in the house. So you will have the opportunity. So the museum collections as climate archives, what is needed to make that kind of research possible, and what kind of possibilities and results may be opened up? Martin, please start.
First, the first question can be answered by we need to know a lot more about what we have, what the objects are, where exactly they are from, when they came, and what the circumstances were under which they were collected. Because that, especially when it comes to archaeological collections, is important to answer the second question. The distribution of certain materials is something that gives you an indication of what you find, where, when. It's a quick answer. Longer answer after 2 o'clock in our workshop.
Okay, to be continued then. Some of you that want to contribute or give perspective on this issue, the collections as climate archives, and how can they be used? Of course, we are familiar how we quite often use the collections, of course, with different topics and different themes. But for me, at least, this has opened up a new area in the work with the collections. That since they are over 4, 5, 6,000 years old, how can we give perspectives on the current climate change? Yeah, Marie?
Well, this is not saying how, but I just have a question to you really about the prerequisite for making them used for climate research or for in that kind of area. And that's knowledge about their existence. How do the researchers that would be able to profit from the collections, how do they become aware that they exist? And I think that is an area of importance. And I would also like to add, we talk about climate today, but also sustainability. And I would just like to bring biodiversity loss also into the equation. Yeah. I work a lot with biodiversity, and the collections, I think, can be enormously useful to learn more about the current extent of biodiversity loss, and also how can we do something about it.
Ferris?
Yeah, I think that was really an interesting question, and I think coming from heritage studies, I would certainly see the human-climate relations as a constituent of any future heritage, and taking that, as a point of departure, thinking also with the exhibition that we've been to human nature. I think if we take that kind of Anthropocene seriously, then we could actually think about the reinterpretations of museums' collections from that perspective, and in order to expose the anthropogenic footprint in the collection, and that, I guess, that can provide us with a chance to think about the future policies of collecting practices in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, Ambridge.
Okay, Climate Museum UK does aim to signpost collections that exist everywhere in the UK and actually available online everywhere in the world, so that museums can tell climate stories much better. But I would say that there's a really big need, which is to be collecting in response to the emergency, so that for museums to be better able to interpret the current situation, they need to be collecting the current experience, and to be very inclusive about that, not just focused on local communities, for example. So yes, contemporary collecting is a really important theme, a really important need. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. And I understand then, of course, we need to make the collections known to a broader research community, but also, of course, to a broader, to the whole society. But But then when looking at the collections in this respect, and for me, coming from an organization that doesn't do so much collecting anymore, we have our roots in ethnographical museums, so we need to be quite hesitant with regard to some exhibition projects we collect, but we don't have any systematic collection. So that is, of course, a challenge, and it would be interesting to hear a bit later of examples of institutions sitting here that might be collecting much more frequently than we do. Martin, you gave us a cliffhanger, but as not all of us will join into your workshop, you can perhaps elaborate a little bit what you are going to say and your perspectives on this.
Well, the basic idea that I want to follow during the workshop is a threefold one. One is connected to future collecting. Since the exhibition that we have downstairs right next to Human Nature is Röster von Arktis, Voices from the Arctic. And that one is an exhibition on Inuit reflections, so Arctic reflections on climate change in the Arctic. Still, the question there is, I mean, the materials used are all the materials used from the Arctic? And the clear answer is no, because some of the Inuit artists chose to use stone from Brazil. Now, what does that tell us about climate change, and how do they take that? What is it that they understand when they talk about climate change? So the first thing is we need to understand what it is that we talk about when talking about climate change. And that is, of course, connected to our collections, too. So future collecting is affected by that. Then integrated past management. Sounds strange, maybe, but is an integral part, because that can have an effect on data. If we try to do research on the age, or if we do research on certain types of material, the outcome of that research is affected by the past management of older days, of former days. So integrated past management, or past management in general, is something we have to take care of. And then what we find in our collections is a large collection, especially from the Arctic, that includes all kinds of bones, organic material, and in some cases we have the exact find spots. So taking a very close look at our collections in comparison with many, many other collections that have collections from the same spots, we can see what the distribution of certain species in certain areas during certain times is. And that is something that can help thinking about changes over time, when they happen, and how that affected also the humans working with these materials. Because what we can see in some cases is objects have been brought from one place to the next, human migration, that is also part of the whole thing.
Okay. Any reflections on this from your side? No. No, but I think for you, Marie, for instance, with your research on biodiversity, there is, of course, also very interesting findings. But again, that is what you say, to make it known, the objects and that are in the collections. That, of course, the historical perspectives in museum collections might very well be possible to give very interesting knowledge about this development. Yeah?
Yeah.
Please.
I also think we need to, all of us, be prepared, and I'm sure Bridges has talked about that, to think in new ways, because we don't know. We're at kind of at the brink here, where we're going to go to ensure that our children and grandchildren have a sustainable future, or a future to live in. And there is, I mean, it is a climate emergency, and it's necessary that we all be creative and think in absolutely totally new ways. And to be able to do that, or to assist us in doing that, I think collections can really be very, very useful. But I don't think any one of us knows exactly how. So I think dialogue and meeting between different groups, I think, is extremely important. And I don't think anyone of us can answer exactly how.
No,
but just to be very open, seek new ways, seek new partners, seek new dialogue.
Yeah. First, yeah.
I think I would just pick up on this, and I totally agree with you in terms of dialogue. You know, beyond museum boundaries or across even museum boundaries, collaboration, which you might call it even collaborative governance or something like that. You know, where museums as institution works together with other institutions and other community representatives to actually find new creative ways of doing museum works or museum practices. At the same time, I still think that another important issue to consider is not only to collaborate, but also to think inside and now start all over again thinking about how we approach collection. I think many people work in heritage studies. I'm sorry that I don't know. I'm not a museum expert, in fact.
No.
So and
that's why you're here.
Yes, thanks very much. I feel privileged to talk with an important audience here. But I think one way of always working with built environment is to approach history or areas with historic significance with the idea that we need to preserve. And that kind of idea is important to think about change. Are we about to preserve only, or are we looking for transformation? And that's I think one of the issues that at least attract me when I work with the past. Are we working with the past in order to make a transformation in the society and as a bigger goal or as a bigger development agenda? In that sense, the way we work with collection would be not only about preservation, but also about engagement, critical engagement with with collections, possibly.
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, that was a very nice, move to the second question, I think. But before we turn into that, and I want to discuss with Bridget also or not to challenge you, but you were quite outspoken with regard to the museums' supposed neutrality or the need for museums to be agents of change. And as Feras said, the transformative force that museum can have. But before we move on to that, I would just open up the floor then. If you have some special comments, want to share perspectives, share ideas on the collections as climate archives and the things that have been presented here by the panel. Some of you perhaps introduce or represent museums that are collecting to a much larger extent than, for instance, the World Culture Museums. So, Annie, reflections, ideas?
If nobody has a question formed just yet, could I just say a little response?
Sure.
That I think we definitely need to shift from using collections to prove that climate change is happening, is caused by humans, and is here now. That's been the dominant story of the interpretation in many science museums particularly. We don't need to do that anymore. I think that we now have to think not just in new innovative ways, but in purposeful ways that are thinking about, do we need to use these collections to transform the way people think? Do we need to rescue these collections? It has to be about how can we use our assets in this situation here now. So it has to be a contextual, situated response.
Yeah. Okay. The floor is open. Any ideas? Okay. We might come back to this, and you may come back to it in the group discussion. I should also say that it's perfectly right, of course, to give comments and share ideas in Swedish, and then we will handle the translation. So please feel free on that as well. Okay, moving then to the second one, and I phrase it like this: what kind of positions may museums take in the promotion of environmental and social sustainability? We have touched upon it before lunch and here now, but I will start by asking you, Feras, with your work on heritage and what heritage can offer for reconciliation and peace-building processes, for instance. So please.
Yeah, that's a very challenging topic, I believe, and I recently co-authored a book chapter with a bunch of very interesting scholars, a book called Heritage and Peace Building. I could talk about that, but I thought one important thing that I was thinking about it is the way museums are defined in ICOM. And apparently the definition really nicely separates between purpose and function, thinking about purposeful practices in that sense. And I thought that was analytically important, maybe, to have that kind of divide. At the same time, thinking about peace building and justice and you know, what is the purpose of museums, I guess all of us do have or agree with me maybe that museums have a role to enhance social justice. But then the language of social justice and democracy doesn't very much appear in that definition, ICOM, the museum definition in ICOM. So I thought that probably that important thing that we need really to work on, and in order to enhance it. In Palestine, there is museums were never being allowed by the occupation power, and then during many years of occupation, small-scale community-led museums emerged behind scenes, actually working, and the idea of that was to challenge the systematic process of silencing, if not demolishing, the material witness. The material environment that bear witness on the Palestinian collective memory and existence. So those museums worked as resistance, to resist that kind of silencing of Palestinian Nakba, which emerged because of the declaration of the State of Israel as an independent state. So that kind of museum is quite interesting, and they worked for peace building, they worked for justice, they worked for challenge that kind of violation of history. So I think for that reason, I thought the language of social justice and peace building democracy needs actually to be incorporated in ICOM definition to have a more active role of museum in society development. One symbol. Can I say another one? Yeah, about peace building. Now, thinking about peace building, I think it is not many museums do work with peace building, except probably the network of museums for peace, who have a clear agenda for peace. Probably other type of museums, they do indirectly contributing to that. I believe that all museums have the potential to make a contribution into peace building, and I'm talking about peace building in which is different than peacekeeping, peacemaking. Peace building, you have a process where you have periods of time, you have stages of development where different museums can actually jump in and make a small contribution in different forms. Learning, teaching, healing, and different ideas. One idea is to do with peace building is to uncover hidden histories in different forms. We have history, often in heritage studies we focus on conflict, violence, war. We don't talk much about peace. And I think museums can actually uncover histories of peace, histories of coexistence. In Palestine, Israel, this is very much possible if we are actually to have peace in that area, to build peace in that area. We need actually to come back to the history archives and museum collections to reveal that that area has actually coexistence of different religions, including Jewish, Muslims and Christians and other religions and philosophies. So that existed in a long time, and I think museums in Israel, museums in Palestine can actually do some kind of contribution, and museums outside Palestine, Israel can do the same thing by uncovering that kind of hidden histories. You can apply the same metaphor on other things by looking at segregated cities. I mean, Gothenburg is one of those popular cities being segregated. I think museums can do something there as well.
Okay, thank you. Reflection on this from the panel? Anyone? Well, I
I
assume
can just
that it seems
add
like
one thing.
Marie is hesitant.
No, I was pointing to
Yeah.
Martin. I think
Okay.
Martin was.
You pointed
yes,
at him. Okay,
yes,
good.
Yep,
Yes.
thanks for that.
Then, yes,
Yeah.
the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you. One thing to just add to that is that especially we as an ethnographic museum, we can be a forum for others. So we are an open space, and we can help others get a voice in that, like we did with Voices from the Arctic, because that's not our exhibition. That is one that exists because of a collaboration with Inuit artists.
Yeah.
So we picked the objects, but they explained them.
Yeah. Okay, Bridget?
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on this idea of examining violence and peace. I think that what museums can really start to do is to put violence and peace in a more ecological frame of thinking. So, you know, extractivism is violence, and a regenerative way of being is peaceful. So, you know, maybe museums have a role to play, which is leading, you know, a global truth and reconciliation project, which really pulls together, rather than continuing this fight between, you know, there's genocide on one hand and there's ecocide on another, and they're two completely separate things. You know, when there's ecocide, people don't survive. You know, when powerful forces destroy places, you know, for their own enrichment, you know, people are displaced from their land. It's a human justice issue and an ecological justice issue. So what can we do in museums to start uniting forces, you know, all coming together and using our collections for this big truth project?
Yeah, Marie?
Yeah, just to continue on that, I come back to this essential, kind of very basic question of how do we live? And of course, museums can be, for us as visitors, a mirror into how do I live, looking at how did other people live in the past, how do other people and peoples live today, and how do I live in relation to other humans, other people, but also in relation to other living beings, other species. And I think the museums have an enormous role to play there, and also linking the issue of peace and living peacefully together, particularly in a future perspective where we can foresee that we will have many more migrants that will have to leave the land, leave their home, leave their place, because they can no longer live there because of climate change. So yes, I think museums there can be enormously important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair.
I wanted to pick up on one of the concepts that you used yourself in the lecture, empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that's quite interesting because some time ago I wrote about heritage as safe space, which apparently can be an interesting and problematic at the same time. Safe space where you have more neutral kind of space, where you got dialogues, exchange of ideas, places where people probably would feel safe and able to express their opinions. And then I believe that we have also been living with the notions that museums are or should be neutral, should be safe space for the exhibition of different views and different periods of history, and you know, yeah. And then I come across a work. I listened to you this morning, and then I came across Maria Vlacho, who's a museum expert from Portugal, who doesn't like very much the idea of safe space, but apparently she likes empathic space. And the empathic space, she suggests that where people are invited to acknowledge the existence of a plurality of views, in the first place, and then where these views may be discussed respectfully and at a personal level, so that we may negotiate our living together. You know, living together in difference is one of those important questions in urban planning and city development, where cities, is home for different cultures, different backgrounds, ethnicity, and things like that. So how do we live together is one of those challenging questions to be able to respond to. And I thought the museum, in fact, can also have such kind of role to contribute into that bigger debate, which is how to be able to live together in difference.
Okay, thank you. And apparently there is a thing here for us, being the World Culture Museums, being a national authority under the government. We are at present, and been for the last years, all state museums and public finance museums. We have a new museum law that really encourage our independence, so to speak, from the politics. But still, there is a question among different political parties, for instance, how independent we could be, how active we should be in political matters. Coming from your presentation this morning, you really advocate us to be agents, and I want to put that to you in the audience. How do you look upon this? Museums as neutral places, and museums more like active advocates for change. Any view on that?
I have something else. I just wanted to inform everybody that they are gonna. There's gonna be an explosion.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes, they are. Planned one. Yes, a planned one. They are drilling a tunnel behind us, so in 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Big bang.
No worries. We are very used at it. Thanks, you. Thanks, Sophia. Yeah. So we have there. Shall we try to use the microphone? So I think yeah.
My name is Mariana. I work at the Science and Technology Museum in Stockholm, and I am more a science center person than a museum person, but since I've been working at the museum for 25 years, I'm familiar with the discussions about objects and collections and all these things as well, and totally agree on many of these things. But when you say a museum should be a safe place, I can just say that there are no safe places anymore, anywhere. And I would say that we need to be facilities where we take action. And I'm also thinking that we should really look around us also. Where else is this fight going on in the same field we're working in? And I say this because I'm familiar with the work that goes on in the science center environments, where they also have formed declarations for work for the environment. So this is one of the things I want to emphasize, that we should look into what's going on already so that we could tap in and take advantage of work that's already been done. And also, of course, then get more knowledge about this field. I have one more thing that I've been starting to promote for, and that is museums for, also Fridays for the future, where the museums are a big part in that. And for a while I was thinking maybe not Fridays, why not Måndag för miljön? Yeah. So something along these lines. And I just want us everybody to think about these things in those terms.
So thank you. Anyone else? On the museums as safe places or not, or agents? Okay. Yeah, reflections on that from the panel? Yeah?
well, as you probably realize I completely agree with you that there are no safe spaces, and we all understand, I think, now that we're at an unprecedented place, and no one knows exactly where we need to go, we know where we need to be. In 10 years' time, we should decrease our fossil fuel emissions by half, and even that will not be enough. I don't know if any of you have seen Göteborg stad, the municipality of Gothenburg, commissioned a study and a strategy for decreasing fossil fuel emissions. It came out in August last year, and the authors of the study said that, well, consumption should decrease in Gothenburg by 30% per year in the coming 8-10 years, which is enormous. So the challenge we have is totally unprecedented, and I completely agree with you. We just have to do everything we can, and we need to join forces. We need to, I believe very much in dialogue, because I think that's the only way forward, because we have to learn from best practice and from good examples, and not just within our sphere. I'm not within the museum sphere, but I'd love to learn together with you and from you.
Bridget, do you want to comment on this? I don't know what you already said.
Well, I feel like I want there to be more argument. You know, we're all so much in agreement.
Me too.
I'm trying to think, what can I say that will, I don't know, throw a bomb in, like the bomb going off. So it makes me want to be more extreme. But in the UK, you don't have so much agreement. You know, there are more people maybe frightened about the impact of Brexit, so they don't want to talk about the climate crisis so much. So I really struggle to get people around to talk about these things. But I suppose if I can, a point I wanted to make is that I think we shouldn't be too led by people demanding more discussion about climate change. You know, yes, it's good to listen to what people want and what they want to come and find out about, but and young people are starting to say, let's, you know, take action on the climate. But I don't think we should be too market-led. That isn't a marketing issue. It's actually about thinking, you know, how does this drive our ethos and our purpose? So yeah, we must listen, but not to craft our offer to be more attractive. Do you see the subtle difference? You know, it's we have to be deeply, profoundly ethical and purpose-driven.
Okay. No, but for me, it's kind of, if I try to be as you, a little bit more provocative. No, but looking at, for instance, the new definition of ICOM, of museum in ICOM, you mentioned that first as well. That was criticized also, but why, if museums are operating in this way, do we need the UN? Is it because we should do everything? And the balance between take action on a broad level, but still be focused with regard to the collections that we host, and some represent Natural History Museum, World Culture Museums, City Museums again, and so on. So how to find the balance between to link it to our brief from those who pays us, the taxpayer. And reflections on that. Can we be too broad? Do we need the UN if we take up this role? Marie?
Well, of course we need the UN, because we need everybody. We need everybody's effort. But what I wanted to say is that I think museums and also academia and universities, where I come from, we have a unique role as knowledge holders. The museums, the collections, the knowledge that is gathered and is based at museums in different ways is an enormous resource in guiding us in the way towards a sustainable future. And if all of us start at the knowledge that we have and then try to find ways to orient ourselves together with others and tell others about the knowledge that we have, start from there, I think we do something right.
Yeah, first.
2 points on the museum-society relations. I think we need UN, but we need a different form of UN, not the one that we have now. That's my statement. Museum-society relations, I guess 2 points here. I like in one of the things that are done here, the, what do you call it, pop-up, the mobile, and the mobile workshop. Very often in some museums, activities are kept within the physical boundaries, the walls of the museums. And I think it's kind of interesting when the museum reach out for society, somehow going out. Like we talk about urban sprawl in the urban planning language. I would say like museum sprawl somehow outside outside the museum, but also in the city. And this can be in different ways. I thought about it in one way that is more about those mobile workshops or mobile museums. But also there are what we call it in the language of heritage from below, is that there are informal practices of collecting and exhibiting that is happening in the society. I think one of the interesting things is that kind of collaboration between formal or official museum with non-official practices of museum practices. I guess many ethnic associations for example, in the city of Gothenburg, they do consciously or unconsciously collect things that represent them as kind of being foreign cultures in Sweden. That kind of practices is quite interesting, and I think it can be somehow developed into a more kind of dialogue or, if you would like, exchange of across cultures between museums, official forms of museums, and non-official museum. And that will actually allocate some of the museum responsibility towards the society. So we don't need to ask museums to do more than what they can do, in fact. The other thing is, the other point quickly about it is designing exhibition. I'm originally architect. I'm no longer architect, but I used to be architect. One of the important things in architecture is design. And I think in exhibition, we often pay a lot of attention on design. Color, lighting, how to look, how to move through, and such things. Because the important for us is the experience of museum visit. We pay a lot of attention on that. One of the things that interests me is what happens after the museum visit. Do we give attention, when we design exhibition, do we give attention to what people take with them from the museum and then influence their, in the long term, influence their life? That kind of climate change also is an important message that, museum can think about, when they design their exhibition, the experience of museum visit.
Yeah. Yeah, Martin.
I'm starting a real beef now. Because I think one of the big mistakes we make as museums is to think that exhibition equals museum. Okay. So we think of museums as being places where you come and see exhibitions, but we have a lot more. I mean, we have 5% of what we have on exhibit. 95% of the objects are in the storages. Now, who of you from other museums does have an online collection? Who of you has the collections in a database online available?
Okay.
And who of you knows the number of objects that we find if we search for that now? Who of you has the number of objects in their heads?
We have the City Museum of Mölndal here. Slow.
Fasi, you don't cut. You are us.
Yeah. So that's the reason why you asked the question, right? Yeah. So we could say yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that is where one of the very big problems come from. If we don't know that, I mean, we are aware in some way that we are kind of archives, but how do we really become archives, and how do we foster interest? How do we make people curious to not only come, consume, and then go? Because we are much more than these collections that we have on exhibit.
I just have a quick story briefly.
Yeah.
In
Please
London,
share.
in London, because you know, we have Brexit, but underlying it is a rise in racism. So we have an Asian Muslim mayor who has agreed with a group that we should. He is going to support a museum of slavery as a way of overcoming the rise in racism, and my response to that is, if you want to stop racism, then support the existing museums and the existing small grassroots projects that are already trying to tackle cultural problems like this. So we have a Black Cultural Archives in London, but it's going to close because it's losing funding. So this is the most important archive the mayor could support. And so what we have this thing where people see a problem, they think, let's have an exhibition or a museum to solve the problem. Yeah. But museums don't solve problems like that, not as quick as that. No. We help create the conditions for dialogue and for mutual understanding, but without support for those collections to be researched and looked after, and for the people to interpret them, we can't solve any problems at all. Yeah.
No, that is interesting. Thanks for sharing. That is always a challenge, of course, if we look at the politicians that want to make different projects, be it a large exhibition or a museum. Paris is perhaps one of the ground examples, with all the name of the museums of the former presidents and so on. And we have that in Sweden as well. Very important, of course, but in the budget for 2020, the government sent out the proposal that we should try to investigate the possibilities for creating a Holocaust museum in Sweden, which is, of course, very important. But again, it's one example of what you're saying. Any perspectives, ideas on this? How we pop down and look at, we try to solve problems with exhibitions or by creating a whole new museum concepts, for that matter. Yeah?
Can I ask them a question?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm teacher in the Department of Conservation, and the first course in the program is called Cultural Heritage and Sustainability. So sustainability at the heart of that. So I was asked by one of my students, why don't we have any literature or any reading on the list that's about climate change? So I was very much challenged by that. And she nicely said, maybe because we are taking it for granted that we do think about climate change, so why the hell do we need to have it in the literature, on the literature list? So I was, I was given that question, and I would like to ask you all, do you know on your museum policy, do you have any consideration of climate change explicitly addressed?
Yeah. Any answers? Before we... No? Okay, there. Please take the mic.
I'm from the Maritime and Transport Museums. Yes, we have that we are to reduce our emission of fossil CO2
footprint
to zero in 2030. And 50% in next year, I think. So we're quite active in that type of climate change, that we reduce the possibilities, at least.
Yes, to add on that, as you are a state museum as well, we have in our brief from the government that we should relate and promote the goals in the agenda to 2030. So as a general brief, in all different areas of operation. So that is for the state museums that I know, at least. Okay, yeah, Mary.
So would you be interested in kind of jointly develop or help each other develop such policies for relating to climate change, both in terms of reducing the climate footprint of the museum, but also in terms of how to reach out and use the museum as effectively as possible in terms of a sustainable future? I believe very much in learning from each other, because I think we need to. Would that be something that the museums could do together?
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Christine Keffel, and I work as an exhibition producer at the County Museum of Örebro, and this is my colleague.
Yes, my name is Lars Pitchen, and I work as a handicraft advisor at Örebro Länsmuseum.
Yeah.
And we would like to add
another level on this discussion on the cultural dimension of the subject.
Sustainability.
Yeah, and in our county we work a lot of that, and Christine just produced an exhibition. And
yes, this exhibition is called, I will try to translate it in English, it's the first time, Sensational Findings of the Plastic Age.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. And we made an exhibition before that, from which this exhibition is developed. The finding, and it's a story about the future people who find things in our community that points on that this was a culture of consumption, and they find very strange things. Who they try to explain for themselves, like an exhibition from a museum from the future. And now we are making this exhibition is more interactive for pupils in schools. It's as a game, and it's a kind of pop-up thing that travels around. So we are really trying to use the cultural sustainability concept.
As an arena to discuss the other three dimensions.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
That's the point of departure. Yeah. Thank you. Comments on this? Any more reflections? Yeah.
My name is Ludger Löf. I'm coming from a museum in the countryside. It's a regional museum, Världskulturmuseet.
Yeah.
And I think everybody here in Sweden has followed the debate about money and regional museums. And in my situation, I feel like administrating the lack of personnel and competence at my museum, not the wish and not the ideas. So I think to create a platform where we can share people and competence to develop museums for future, I'm very open for that idea. And I think that this day or this meeting could be a good start of it. So I was very inspired by your keynote speech this morning, and maybe we should start something like a what's it called in English? Grassroots rörelse.
Grassroots.
That's simple.
Yeah.
And we can use social media and start sharing things, sharing knowledge, and sharing people who can inspire other people. I'm sure we all have these everywhere, but we have to meet. And that's why it's good to be here today.
Thank you for that. I'm sure that we will come back to how we look upon the future for us together. I'm so happy that we are such a broad audience, different experiences and different institutions on the national, local, and regional level, and so on. So thank you for that. We will come back to that, how we proceed. Yes, somewhere.
It's Jan Number again.
Yeah.
I think we can use, at least I can do it, we can have 4 arenas with 1.5 million visitors every year. And I see our arenas not only the focus of what we have in them and what we on the exhibitions. It's also an arena for us to say what smart and good things we do for a better life, for sustainability, because we meet so many people, and it's not a separate exhibition. It's an exhibition inside the exhibition, sort of. We can inform and say we do this and that we can do, and if we all sort of help each other in these matters to see what smart things we have done, then we can, I think, just by inspiring so many people from, and for us mainly abroad, I think we can send out a lot of good ideas that may be part of the growing grass.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for that. So, we're moving towards the end of this session. Any concluding remarks from the panel? Reflections? What has been said? Yeah, Marie?
I would just like to reiterate my personal belief in learning from the past and also learning from collections from the past. And today it's almost taboo to say that anything was better in the past than it is today, but from the past we can learn a lot about, and we can see that it was possible to live a fossil-free life. And I think that if I look at other ways of living from the past and from other cultures, it is as if I'm looking in a mirror where I can see myself more clearly by looking at the other. And by doing that, it gives me an inspiration of moving myself in a different direction. So looking at the past, looking at other cultures for inspiration, creativity towards a more sustainable future.
Okay, thank you. Bridget?
Yeah, I would like to say that I think you are leaders. I think you're world leaders in using museums to engage people with the environment, with the climate crisis. You don't see in other countries exhibitions like the one we've just seen. Also, Sweden is so far ahead in the way you live. You already are leaders, and so, you know, rather than just a little bit more talking with each other, step up. As you know, you are like Greta for, you know, for this movement. You know, be seen worldwide.
Okay, thank you. Ferras?
Yes, picking up on that, yes, in Sweden we discuss climate change as a fact. In the US we're still discussing whether it's happening or not, or we believe in it or not. So I guess taking that, you know, as an advantage, and I think museums can actually function as a platform or a space where you invite politicians to use collections to demonstrate climate change and the human impacts on that, to make bigger decisions or to be more, to contribute more into a bigger agenda.
Okay. Martin, do you have anything, or will you save it for the group discussion?
Of course, I save everything for the group discussion.
Clever. Okay. No, but is it right? Yeah, because then we turn on to the next session. Before we do that, I think we certainly can use this discussion as a point of departure for the continuing discussions. And I want to thank the panel, and please join me.